All right, everybody. Welcome to the ThreeView Mirror Podcast, your weekly dose of everything 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if not everything, then at least three very specific, seemingly random topics that we'll talk about each and every week, brought to you by one of the three of us. Now, remember, the other two have no idea what these topics are going to be from week to week, but by the end of the episode, we're going to try to put them together and connect the message that the person who's hosting that week is trying to put together for us. My name is John Catrides, better known across my social media platforms as Gen X Jono, and I am joined by my two co-hosts. Chris?
Yes, I'm Chris Clews, better known as Chris Clews, keynote speaker and author, and I focus on the work and life lessons that we can learn from 80s pop culture, the greatest decade for pop culture ever.
And I'm Rochelle Oblak, better known as Gen X Shell across most of my social media accounts, and where I combine a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of humor to, take a look at the past while bringing it forward.
Welcome to the ThreeView Mirror Podcast.
Please don't mind my coughing today. I have a massive tickle in my throat. I got the cough drops and everything.
I'm sick of it. Enough is enough. The unprofessionalism knows no bounds. Chris, you got our topics today.
I do, and I'm really excited today. My shirt here is going to give away, is giving away one of the topics, but today what I wanted to do is I actually being a huge 80s guy, I'm going off, I shouldn't say I'm going off of the 80s, but 2/3 of this, it could be considered straddling the 80s, I guess. And so we're going to talk about shut up, John. I say the word straddle and you immediately go somewhere.
Did I say a word?
You started smiling. You got that. That's what she said, smile. Okay, so we have three topics today. The topics are the Fonz, Apollo Creed, and Drew Barrymore.
Oh.
Those are our three topics today. So I'm kind of hitting the 80s, but I'm also expanding my pop culture universe a little bit as well.
All right.
So I'll give you a second to kind of
I like it.
Think about those. So let's start with the Fonz. Fonzarelli, Arthur Fonzarelli, one of the, I guess, for me, one of the first cool guys that I saw on TV. And it's so funny to think of Henry Winkler. We all know Henry Winkler now as kind of this obviously we all age and he's a little bit older, but it's hard to think of him as like this super cool guy with a black leather jacket riding the motorcycle if you really didn't grow up in the time of Happy Days. And so I'm going to throw Arthur Fonzarelli out there and get your first impressions on the Fonz.
So first and foremost, today as we record this, it's early November, and I just checked because I was pretty sure. His birthday, 78th birthday, was just a couple days ago. He turned 78 on October 30th. Right. And Fonz was, there were all of us that pounded the jukebox. Jukeboxes were a thing when we were growing up. And I remember I would put a quarter in and pick my song, but then still pound the jukebox and pretend that I was cool enough to make it play a song. The iconic, if slightly misogynistic, snap and the women come running. It was the epitome of pop culture in the 70s and early 80s when we were kids.
Yeah.
Well, that snap can still work, John, depending on, what you're, there's things, you can make it work.
Now when I think of snap, I think of actually In Living Color, 2 snaps in a circle.
But
you guys know that one?
Yep.
Yeah. So what's your first thought, Shell, when you think of Arthur Fonzarelli or the Fonz?
The first thing I thought of was my sister and I when we were younger. He always did the thumbs up, if I remember correctly, and it was a thing to go around and do the thumbs up. I don't know why that pervaded into my sister and I's play, but maybe it was watching too much Happy Days.
Do you remember the
episode? And of course he had
to
sit on it.
Do you remember the episode where him and Mork from Ork had the finger off, like Fonzie did the thumbs up and Mork did the nanu, and they were like battling with their finger gestures?
Oh yeah.
I think there are so many things I could say about that right because I've never seen that episode. But
It was the backdoor pilot
Just
for
imagine.
Mork and Mindy.
That's right. And that was one of the first, I believe, I could be wrong, but certainly for me, one of those first crossovers when it came to two popular television shows, because you had Mork show up on season 5, and Mork from Orkon. He was actually, at the time, Mork from Ork. And then Fonz ended up on Mork and Mindy a few seasons later. I think 2 seasons later, ended up on Mork and Mindy. So that was a pretty cool crossover. And the Fonz, we think about the Fonz being super cool. And of course, again, and he said sit on it. And he had like the black leather jacket and the motorcycle, as we talked about. But he was also a really interesting character in the sense that he actually was in all 255 episodes. And there was only one other Happy Days character, Howard Cunningham, was also in. And he started as a secondary character. He was not actually supposed to be a main character on the show. But he was so good at what he did, and people embraced the character, that he ended up being, when you say Happy Days, people immediately say the Fonz.
Yeah, originally
cool.
Coming over from American
did not know
Graffiti,
that.
Richie was the star of the show. It was supposed to be built all around Richie Cunningham, and they actually limited the Fonz's screen time and what he was able to do because censorship back then. The first season, he wasn't allowed to have his leather jacket. That was considered too much of a hood thing back from the censor. So the first episodes, he had like a gray members only jacket, like almost like an off-white members only jacket, not near as cool. And then eventually they were able to move on to the greaser look and give him the leather jacket, but he wasn't allowed to wear a leather jacket. That's how different television was back then in the early season.
That is fascinating. I did not know that, and I'm glad you put that image in my brain, because now I want to go back and look at the Fonz sans leather jacket. I had no idea.
Yeah, and nobody ever put members only jacket and cool in the same sentence. So they really kind of gave him a rough start. If he had the parachute pants along with it, it would have been really bad. So, one of the things about Fonz, too, that a lot of people don't remember is that there were a lot of episodes where Fonz was an advocate, the character was, for people with disabilities throughout the show. And there were a number of episodes where he was working with students that had disabilities, kids that had disabilities. And so if you go back and watch the show, it's a really interesting thread because, again, we all think of Fonz as the cool kid, but he was actually doing some really interesting and kind of progressive stuff in terms of his character and what he did to help out in society as well.
Well, and don't forget, there was an story arc where he himself became disabled. There was this huge trope in the 70s and 80s where everybody at some point or another in an episode had what I call the Mary Ingalls syndrome. They just suddenly went blind. And if you remember, he got hit over the head with like a metal tray and went blind for an episode. And he had to show that he could build his motorcycle back from scratch. Do you remember the episode? It was a great episode. So like in order to get Fonzie to be Fonzie again and not be like beaten down, they took his motorcycle apart and brought it into the house in pieces and said, now put it back together again. And he had to do that blind to show that he still could as a mechanic. And then he got his vision back by the end of the episode. But yeah, there was like people got blind, people were amnesia, lost their memories from hitting their heads. Like there were all these tropes that played through, and blindness was one of them. That sounded more interesting in my head.
I actually will go back and look for that episode now, though, because once I started doing research, I was like, you know what, Happy Days is a pretty good show. I want to go back and watch some of these episodes because you don't really find it on Nick at Night or reruns anymore. I want to mention a couple of things too about Henry Winkler, but before I do you know who else was in the running for the Fonz who came in second in terms of auditions to play the Fonz?
Not a clue.
I knew
it was Mickey Dolenz
from
from Monkees.
Oh yeah, I did know that.
Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees. And he almost had it until Henry Winkler came in, which is kind of interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about Henry Winkler because he's a really interesting guy as well. And if we look back through his kind of acting arc, he was in the Mary Tyler Moore. I know that's something that John loves, the Mary Tyler Moore show. We were talking about that on another episode. The Bob Newhart show he was on as well. Lords of Flatbush. He was in also. That was one of his first movie roles. And he was in the MC Hammer Too Legit to Quit video, which is pretty awesome because I'm gonna have to go back and watch that now.
Wait,
Yes.
whoa. Back the truck up. I can't.
Beep,
Seriously. Wait a minute. Beep, beep, beep. So I missed Henry Winkler in the MC Hammer video, like hammer pants, and was he wearing hammer pants?
Yeah,
And,
he's had hammer pants and he did the hammer dance. No, I'm kidding.
I-
No, I'm kidding. I don't think he did.
I am not recalling this. All I can rip the too lit that there was that hand motion, too legit to quit. Did you
Yeah.
do that when you were?
Oh, yeah.
I can't even do it now. Yeah. I had no idea. I'm going back to look at that too. I need to take notes.
Yeah, he was all over the place. He was in Scream, South Park. So I mean, he's voiced characters on South Park. He had a small part in Scream. There is actually a movie, a 1980 movie that is one of my favorite underrated comedies of all time, which Henry Winkler starred in with Michael Keaton. You know which one that is? It's important to this conversation because Ron Howard, actually Richie and Opie and then Richie directed it, and it was, I believe, his first director role.
I'm trying to think of early Michael Keaton movies with the Mr. Mom.
Night Shift
was one that comes to my mind.
Night Shift.
Okay.
You got to watch it if you haven't seen it. It's hilarious. Henry Winkler is complete opposite of the Fonz. They work in a morgue together. Henry Winkler is he's like the typical guy that you would think would work in a morgue, very quiet, introspective. And Michael Keaton is this loud kind of guy, really loud, obnoxious guy that gets a job at the morgue when Henry Winkler works at night and just wants everything to be quiet. It's a really, really good. It's got Shelley Long is in it as well. Highly recommended. But it's kind of cool that, they're Richie Cunningham and the Fonz and then work together on this movie called Night Shift, which is, like I said, one of my favorite underrated comedies from the 80s and from all time.
It's just been years since I've seen it last.
I probably did. I did watch a lot of movies then, but I think I was over consuming. We were heading out to the video store and whatever box wasn't empty, we were just pulling those home and watched them, serial watched them in a night. So I've probably seen it, but don't recall.
And so who would you just, as we kind of wrap up this first segment with the Fonz, is there a character that you would say, I mean, there have to be characters that were inspired by Fonz within, these decades of television since Happy Days. And I always think of the opening for Saturday Night Fever. And when John Travolta's walking down the street, and I feel like that was almost feels like he was inspired a little bit by Fonz. Can you think of any other people that might have been inspired by the Fonz?
I'm trying to think of the entire cast of Ralph Macchio and Tom Cruise. Name the movie for me, Chris. You know this.
Outsiders.
Outsiders, yes.
Yes.
That's the thing that I come to think of. I mean, that was the persona that the Fonz was basically playing, was that sort of a greaser thing, but the Fonz was just a lot nicer of a person. He was a lot happier and
yeah.
But if you put those two together though too, there was also the helping of, you mentioned like him helping the disabled and a lot of the outsiders, that ends up being part of the plot of the movie is the help of somebody that needed help. So just trying to connection there. I know that's not it, but
I mean, I'm going to go away from that a little bit. Because I think he inspired a greater trend towards three-dimensional characters. So I think when I think of the character of the Fonz, it would have been really, really easy to just write him as the hood, the guy that beats everybody up, the guy that's on his bike with the leather jacket. But as a kid, I remember watching. And as an adult now, I love the relationship he had with Mrs. C. With Mrs. Cunningham, because there were some really, really well-written, sweet moments that you wouldn't find in a comedy of the time between the two of them. Him and Shortcake, Joni, the relationship he had with her, with Richie. It's just there was more to him than just the character, the way it was written. And I think a lot of that is Henry Winkler. I think he brought a lot of himself into the character of the Fonz. And I think that started a trend where we had these moments in these sitcoms that went beyond being a situational comedy. It gave more of a three-dimensional rounding out of these characters that I think before that were very one-dimensional.
Yeah, because if you look back at some of the early the earlier shows in the 60s, very, very, mother, father, they're, they were very, very scripted. And these were scripted as well, but they were scripted to the point where they were more human characters and they weren't quite as phony as what was portrayed. And I'm trying to think of the early 60s with Leave It to Beaver kind of things. The Happy Days started to bring out the real interactions of real families. So I like that, Chris. Or John, sorry.
Yeah.
We're pretty interchangeable.
Easy to mix. I do want to touch on Henry Winkler because he started as the Fonz and he was this cool guy. But then as he progressed in his acting career, Night Shift was a great example, but also as the kind of really bad high school football or college football coach in The Waterboy. And then he was in a movie called Here Comes the Boom. If you ever saw that, that's a great comedy where he plays the music teacher. And it's so interesting to see, and to your point, John, about three-dimensional and Henry Winkler, that I think Henry Winkler as a human is so three-dimensional that it's created all of these different types of characters that he can play, that he could leave that Fonz stereotype or character type behind and really never revisit it and still have a great career. Is pretty awesome. That's very hard to do for most actors and actresses. Once you're in a role that's so iconic like that, to leave that entire personality behind, shed it, and go in a completely different direction is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think for the whole world to accept that he was now an actor outside of the Fonz is definitely, he was typecast, but yet he overcame that. He used his natural talents and everything else. You still look at him and you think you're watching Scream and you're like, hey, the Fonz is in Scream, but he is Henry Winkler there. But he's also in your mind, he's the Fonz, and he did overcome that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll just finish up by saying I think the reason he was able to do that is because Henry Winkler is like the antithesis of the Fonz. He's even said, there's nothing cool about me. He's a dorky Broadway kind of guy. I think he was a professionally theatrical trained actor. He goes, I'm not Fonzie. And I think that's why it made it easy, because the minute you saw him in an interview or anywhere else step outside the role, you're like, all right, that's not him. He left that. He was able, when they called cut, Fonzie was left on the stage and Henry Winkler walked off.
So this is actually a perfect segue. The Rocky franchise. So please tell me that you appreciate the Rocky movies at least.
At least up to the first 3. I think I fell off after 3.
4? You didn't like Drago?
I don't think I saw 4. All right, no, 5 then. I'm sorry. So 4.
Well,
I saw
5
4.
is bad.
Yeah, I
5
saw 4. Yeah, and then that was it. 4 was Drago I absolutely loved. Yeah, 4, that was it though. After that, the one I'm thinking of that I didn't like was 5. I think they took it one too many.
5 was terrible, but Rocky, which was Rocky Balboa, which was after that one where he should have gotten the Academy Award, is a fantastic movie when he owns the restaurant, and it's just a great kind of the relationship between he and his son. And then the Creed movies are fantastic. But I want to focus on his main nemesis that then becomes ultimately his best friend, which is Apollo Creed. And again, as I mentioned earlier at the opening, I wanted to be Apollo Creed. I loved Apollo Creed, actually more than Rocky in so many ways. And I loved the character, and I loved his bravado, I guess is the word I'm looking for. He was just such a showman. But then, as you mentioned, three-dimensional. We learn so much more about who the real Apollo Creed is, and it's just a show that he's putting on. But when he's off the stage or away from the camera, he's a completely different guy. And we learn this throughout his character arc as well in the Rocky franchise. And he was played by Carl Weathers. Carl Weathers, who actually was an NFL player for a short time with the Oakland Raiders, and played football at San Diego State. He graduated with a master's in theater arts. So he was already thinking about acting even while he was playing football. And so I want to talk about Apollo Creed, but I also want to talk a little bit about Carl Weathers as well, because he has had a pretty good acting career, and his character type kind of stayed where it was because he's such an imposing guy. And so movies like Predator, he was absolutely perfect for. Action Jackson, which is one of my favorite I guess you would call him the the complete insanity of action movies in the 80s that we had. And so I guess when we talk about Apollo Creed, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you in terms of his character in the Rocky movies?
See, it's harder for me to contribute because although I watched all the Rocky movies, I honestly was at an age. When did the first one come out? What year was the first one?
76.
76. Okay,
yeah.
so I must have seen that one much later in my life because in 76 I would have been 3. And I think when Rocky 4 came out, that was the one that I identified with the most, probably because I was of an age where that became a popular movie to watch. And I, of course, have seen bits and pieces of all of the others, but as a female, I wasn't going backwards to pick up on this boxing movie franchise, just unless it was a big popular movie of the day, like Drago and Rocky 4.
Yeah. You know that Drago, we're going to talk about Apollo Creed here, but Drago, the character played by Dolph Lundgren, you know, he actually is a legit genius.
Did hear that somewhere, that he like mental level genius kind of thing. And he was not too hard on the eyes back then either. I mean, us girls that was what we were watching Rocky for.
Yeah.
For just watching that attitude and that accent that he had. And
I must break you.
Yeah, he was hot. That spiked blonde hair.
And Bridget, was he married to Brigitte Nielsen?
Yeah.
He was. Okay, because the two of them made a very good matching couple. I mean, they were like the Russian version of Barbie doll and Ken on steroids. I mean, they matched.
Yeah. And then she dated Flavor Flav, I think, after at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
She had dated Sylvester Stallone.
I think she did. But back to Apollo Creed. So, John, I was going to ask you again, like, what is your, in terms of watching the Rocky movies and your feelings for Apollo Creed?
So there's a couple sayings that I fall back on quite a bit. One is there was room on the door for Jack, and the other is Goose didn't need to die. And for me, Apollo Creed, it was the same sort of thing. It was a Goose-level death. And yes, it propelled Sylvester Stallone. It propelled Rocky along his mission and the revenge and everything. But I just remember as a kid hating that. I absolutely hated that. He went from being the protagonist and the quote-unquote bad guy in the first movie, and then they fight. And again, still pretty much the bad guy in the second, although Sylvester Stallone earns his respect. And then in the third with Clubber Lang, that's when the two of them forge this friendship. And I'm like, I like this. This is like a Batman and Robin kind of thing. It's like the two of them against the world. And then he gets killed, like beat up and killed. And I hated it. I mean, I'm just like, that didn't need to happen. You want dramatic, fine, paralyze him, I guess, if you need to. Make him blind in one eye. I don't know. Hobble the guy if you need the story to progress. But at least then he's still the sage, wise voice in Rocky's ear. Then we're just left with Burgess Meredith, who does nothing but Rocky. I mean, we needed that wisdom, and I didn't like it.
Mickey died, but Mickey died in 3.
Another travesty. Come on. One death was enough. Goose level unnecessary dying. That's what I think.
Just name him a little.
Yeah, just.
This is the job done.
Whenever I hear the word hobble, all I can think about is misery. Now. Oh God, oh, yeah. That was just.
Yeah, bring Kathy Bates in. That would have been a good Rocky 5. Have her come in. She could have done the job.
When she said it's for the best.
It's for the best.
It's for the best.
That scene.
Oh God. That's what I think of when I hear the word hobble. But it was sad for me too. Like it was a sad moment for me as well. Just like, E.T. laying on the riverbed, like that impacted me. He was like pale white and dying. I thought he was going to die as like a kid. And then, of course, Wilson, the volleyball, I've talked, a lot about that and was floating away, how upset I got. But Apollo Creed dying was like, that was when I wanted revenge. I'm like, Rocky better go fight Drago and he better kick his ass. And then, of course, we got likely the greatest training montage in the history of movies. Just incredible. And Apollo Creed, by the way, right before he dies, he also gives us likely the greatest patriotic scene in movie history as well, when he's dressed in all red, white, and blue, and he goes up on the stage, and James Brown is singing "Come Living in America" with everybody in red, white, and blue behind him, and it's just an amazing. I use the GIF all the time at 4th of July, of him dancing with James Brown to "Living in America."
Jif.
I vaguely remember it, Chris. When you say it comes
Jif is
back.
peanut butter. Jif is peanut butter. No, sorry, go ahead. No.
No, I said, I didn't know you guys were talking. I said, when you say these things with the red, white, and blue, my mind knows that I've watched this. It just I didn't internalize it in the same way.
Yeah, I can see
and I mean,
back and forth and, doing the whole thing. But then the Soviet Union kicks our ass. They kill him at the end of that. Again, I hate the juxtaposition that, oh my God, USA, and then he's dead. I mean, the only way it would have worked for me is if Rocky, in fact, killed Drago. Then it would be an eye for an eye. Then it would have worked. But no, they should have just blinded him in one eye. And there was room on the door for Jack. Rose was selfish. I'll never.
But then you wouldn't have had Creed, and in the second Creed movie, Drago actually comes back because his son is fighting Creed. So it all comes together with the Creed movies as well. And do you remember who else Apollo Creed actually fought as a charity in a charity event during the Rocky movies?
No.
He was a wrestler, big time 80s wrestler.
Hulk Hogan?
And 90s too.
Hulk Hogan?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Hulk Hogan played a wrestler called Thunder Lips, and they did it only in the 80s, right? When the wrestler became Thunder Lips.
That's what he said. Or that's what he said.
That's what he said. Yes. I mean, I that whole thing in The Office, that running joke was fantastic. Yeah, so he plays Thunder Lips, and there is actually a charity event, and Hulk Hogan's character takes it more seriously than Apollo Creed, and he's like picking him up over his head and slamming him on the canvas. You don't remember that?
I don't remember it at all.
Again, boys and girls. You guys were watching the wrestling and the boxing, and meanwhile, us girls were over there watching fairy tales of.
I think that's stereotypical.
It kind of makes you think there's a lot of. I watched some of that stuff too, but it wasn't to the level of. I think
know you to be this hard. If any woman ever broke
family,
if any woman ever breaks stereotypes and shows us what an 80s rocker chick would, that's why I'm like, I don't buy that from you. You just didn't happen to see, or you didn't happen to embrace this particular thing. But to see you as only a Smurf watching Strawberry Shortcake Girl, no, you were watching Megadeth and Metallica. I mean,
yeah.
I hear you, and there was a lot of I was a tomboy, but I liked girl things.
Yes.
I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, I mean, I watched some of this stuff. I just didn't identify with it. I was in tomboy or not, girl through and through, and so it didn't strike me and hit my heart probably the same way that these do. I mean, you're the exception to the rule, John, with your Beaches movie, and so I can't.
To be fair,
I
need to clear the air on this once and for all. This is episode 5, and those of you who are listening or watching this out of sequence, the song Wind Beneath My Wing is an evil, guilty pleasure, and that's it. The movie, I mean, I have a heart. It was a horrible, gut-wrenching, sad movie, but y'all bring it up like it's like I've got the poster behind me, and I don't. It's in front of me.
Yeah, we know you and Bette Midler. It's okay. So I do want to also mention with Carl Weathers that he was in The $6 Million Man and Starsky and Hutch as well. Two, very prominent television shows as he was, kind of cutting his acting chops, as they say. And then he got the role in Rocky because during the audition, he criticized Sylvester Stallone's acting. And they actually gave him the role because they were looking for somebody who was I mean, I don't know if arrogant is the right word, but somebody who wasn't scared or afraid. Like they needed somebody who was not going to kind of take a step back to the Rocky character. They wanted somebody who was going to step up and be his nemesis. And so because Carl Weathers took that approach where it's just he criticized his acting, he got the gig.
Didn't Sylvester Stallone himself, I don't know if it's an urban legend or if it's real, he was almost done with his acting career until something about a divorce and a dog. And, Chris, you probably would be able to speak better on that, but his dog, he had to sell his dog, I believe, in order to have money for something, and then later went back and rebought his dog.
Yeah, there's some like rumor in fact, and I try to these are the things that I've heard as well. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you that he did write Rocky and he wanted to star in it, but nobody knew who he was. I think he was also in Lords of Flatbush, if I remember. He and Henry Winkler, by the way. But he wrote it and nobody would take him. They were going to buy the script, but he's like, no, I'm Rocky. And they're like, no, you're not Rocky. And he's like, I'm Rocky. And so he finally got, somebody to agree to allow him to, and the rest is history, of course. But there is a story around that he did have to sell his dog to a guy that worked at the convenience store that was down the street from his house. And he said, I'm going to come back and get him. I just need to film this movie. And of course the guy's like, yeah, okay, whatever. And of course he did it. But there was also, when they did the fight scenes for Apollo and Rocky, there was a special they got the one of the best special effects guys in Hollywood at the time to help with the fight scenes. And Rocky, both Sylvester Stallone and Carl Weathers are like, this isn't real enough. Like, let's just hit each other. And that was how I think one of them may have broken a couple ribs. And there was and the special effects guy quit. He's like, you guys are crazy. You're nuts. I don't want to be a part of this. And he left. And then they did the fight scenes because they were pulling the punches as much as they could, but I guess they both agreed it didn't look real enough. So they did hit each other on occasion as well. And also Carl Weathers continued his acting career. I think my second favorite character for him was Chubbs in Happy Gilmore. If you ever saw the movie Happy Gilmore.
Yep.
He played Chubbs, which was kind of
didn't
Adam
he have
Sandler's
a wooden leg or something
in the movie as well.
Didn't he have a wooden leg
hand?
Wooden hand. See, Drago could have broken his hand. Could have cost him his hand, and it would have worked, and it would have fled right into that movie. It writes itself.
I knew you were going to say that.
Of course you did.
Yeah. Listen, that was heartbreaking for me. Like I said, I was a massive Apollo Creed fan. And so that death hit me more. I know a lot of people got hit by Goose and Top Gun, but for me, Apollo Creed, I was like, whoa, what just happened? And can I even continue to watch these movies anymore if there's no Apollo Creed? I did, but I regret Rocky V, as he said. So.
Well, and you can't move on to the next segment without talking about Rocky III, though, because Mr. T was a huge part of the era that we grew up in, and that's the first time I remember being introduced to Mr. T before he became B.A. Baracus. Were you guys 18 fans or no?
Yes, I was. I watched it. It wasn't, again, something that I was focused on every week, but I did watch it.
Same.
I loved it.
Yeah. You're right about Mr. T. I mean, Clubber Lang, it's just an all-time great character. And that whole scene where he's taunting Rocky when Rocky's having his statue unveiled is it's a great scene. And he was discovered too. I mean, at the time, though, I think, again, the story goes, and people can fact check me on this, but I think the story goes that he was a bouncer at one point.
I heard that.
And he was just so good at that character. And then, of course, turned it into Mr. T cereal and everything else, that it became a brand. Mr. T became a brand, and good for him. It's awesome.
One of my best performing shorts, though, if you guys haven't seen it, for Mother's Day, Google it. It's Mr. T doing a Mother's Day rap, and it is the best and worst thing you'll ever see in your life. You got to put it on your list of things to watch. You'll thank me later.
So, as we kind of wind down on Apollo Creed here, there's still a little bit more to talk about, but you mentioned, John, that you wish Apollo Creed would have lived, that he wouldn't have died. And maybe a movie that you've mentioned before with Sylvester Stallone that is a classic 80s movie might have been perfect for Apollo Creed to be his nemesis in that one as well.
Over the Top?
Yes.
You talk, okay, talking about stereotypical differences between boys and girls, after Over the Top came out, there wasn't a lunch table safe across America that us boys weren't arm wrestling each other left and right and doing the hand thing, and I mean imitating it and mimicking it. I mean, there was no flat surface spared from middle school and high school boys that were arm wrestling because of Over the Top. It was the perfect movie.
As soon as you said that, I actually knew more about Over the Top than I did about the original Rockies because of, like you said, that they brought that into school. I can clearly remember all the boys doing that. It really was a thing.
Yeah, and we put our hat on backwards. We thought we had an arm wrestling superpower.
Yes.
Because remember, he'd always put his hat on backwards right before.
And just that moment, though, when he just does something he did with his thumb and just goes over, it was just it was one of those. It was a get away from her, you bitch, alien style move. It hit.
So we're going to wrap up Apollo Creed here, and Apollo Creed played by Carl Weathers. So we've talked about the Fonz, played by Henry Winkler, who was this cool character, right? And of course, Henry Winkler went on to do all of these other roles as well that were not the Fonz, or even close to it. Then we had Apollo Creed, one of my favorite characters, played by Carl Weathers, who also went on to do some cool roles as well, but kind of stuck to that tough guy genre a little bit. He had that that imposing, strong look from being a football player in the late 60s and early 70s. And so now we're going to change complete direction away from the Fonz and Apollo Creed, and we're going to talk about Drew Barrymore. And so the first time that I saw Drew Barrymore was Gertie, the little girl in E.T. And as I've mentioned before, I did see E.T. in the theater, but then I bought tickets to E.T. and snuck into Fast Times with my friends. Again, best decision that I ever made in my short little life at that time was to take those $2 and sneak into Fast Times. But Drew Barrymore, of course comes from acting royalty in terms of her family. Her grandfather, John Barrymore, in the turn of the century, the previous century. So now I had to go back to the 19th century, 1900, right? The turn of the previous century. We had to go back. I get so confused now. So John Barrymore was acting royalty, and of course that's where she came from, and all the problems that come with it as well, of course, for her. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But also some cool things I learned about her is that she has two godmothers, but one is Sophia Loren, and her godfather was Steven Spielberg. So you talk about growing up in acting royalty. Yeah, to have a godmother and godfather like that is pretty amazing. So Drew Barrymore's had an incredible career, and she's one of the few celebrities, entertainers, whatever you want to call them, that has really built this brand that goes beyond her acting. That she is a brand in and of itself. Her name is a brand, and that's not easy to do. We think about people we know by name who are actors and actresses and musicians, but we know them just for that. And she's created a brand, and that's pretty awesome, all things considered. Where her life kind of started, going into rehab at 13 years old. She was in rehab at 13. So when you think of Drew Barrymore, what do you think of?
Besides the obvious with Gertie and E.T., she first caught my attention when she was in Firestarter. And Firestarter was an amazing movie where, I as a girl, okay, this goes back, you're going to like this one too, like that whole, thing. I didn't like boxing, but I wanted to be her and be able to set fire to the world. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to look at something and instantly it's just on fire. I don't like you, you're on fire. That was
okay. We're gonna have to bring a psychologist in for an episode at some point.
Wow. That that explains a lot though. I get the feeling that I don't want to be the one in front of you on my phone at a green light.
Oh, no, it's okay if the boys want to maim somebody at the end, but I can't set a fire. Okay?
You can't set somebody on fire alive, because that's the exact same thing, really.
I didn't say they had to die.
Oh, my God. I don't know where to go. So I love that, except for the burning people alive thing, because Stephen King is just again, for kids of our era, we watched movies we shouldn't have been in the theaters watching. We were listening to songs and understanding what they were telling us at an age we shouldn't have. And a ridiculous amount of us 80s era kids were reading Stephen King books at like 9 and 10 years old. Girls and boys alike. Girls added to that things like V.C. Andrews, which is horror on a completely different level and different scale. But Firestarter, she was the embodiment of Charlie. I think that was the character's name in the book. It was, sometimes I didn't want to see a movie before I read a book because I didn't want them to overpower my image of a character. But I can tell you without even seeing the movie and knowing she was going to do it, that was Charlie. It was perfect. She nailed it on every level possible as a really, really young kid.
Steven Spielberg, not Steven Spielberg, Stephen King, all of his books, I can remember whenever I was in high school, I read almost every single one of them up until a certain point when I stopped reading his books. I remember reading It, Cujo, Misery. The Misery, I think it was a short story from Misery.
No, it was a full book.
They were amazing. Was it a full book?
It was a full book.
Be careful, John. You don't want to get set on fire. So I do want to go back to Drew Barrymore because, again, part of this brand that she's built, but she went through some rough patches as a teenager. And actually, as I was doing research, I read something I didn't know, which was David Crosby from Crosby, Stills and Nash, and his wife actually took her in at 14 years old for a few months because they were sober at the time and they were going to meetings and they knew the head of the rehab she was in. And I guess her health insurance was running out and the head of the rehab said, "We don't have any bed for her anymore. Could you maybe, help her out?" And so she actually writes about it in her memoir. And I just read a little bit about it. I don't know the whole story behind it, but apparently that was exactly what she needed at the time from, David Crosby and his wife. She needed some guidance, that she wasn't getting, obviously, in her family. But look where she is today. Her films, if you didn't know, her films that she's been in have made a combined $2.3 billion at the box office. And that's pretty cool because we don't think of her. I don't think people mention her as like the star that's generated all this revenue, box office revenue, but she absolutely has.
One of my favorite movies with her is with Adam Sandler and the 50 First Dates. That movie there is absolutely incredible. But you were talking about rehab. And if I'm remembering correctly, and her book, I believe I read that book maybe years and years ago, because I believe she came out with that a long, long time ago. She was the little poster child of Studio 54, was she not? She was the girl who was constantly and it was a time of debauchery, and she was absolutely a central part of that. And so you kind of say, well, no wonder she ended up in rehab when she was 13 years old.
I can see it in my mind's eye. There's a picture of her at Studio 54, and it's taken from above her because she was little. And she's got her jelly shoes on, and she's right there in the thick of it. Her mom used to love going clubbing with her.
Can you imagine that today?
No.
Can't imagine it then.
It's true.
We kind of saw it a little bit with Britney Spears. I mean, she talks about, in her book that came out, that, she was enabled as well, which is no surprise, by the way. In a similar situation to Drew Barrymore. I mean, they have different arcs in terms of, where they are, how it impacted them, that Drew Barrymore was able to shed a lot of it. And we see, Britney Spears is still struggling a little, but they had, similar arcs. And Drew Barrymore, it's really interesting because when you do look at her movies, actually, she has been, in some of them, she was not a main character, but most of them, John, she actually was. And some of those movies have come from her own production company, which is really impressive as well. So, and she had a book of photography in 2014 that was all pictures she took of things just walking around that were in the shape of a heart. So she would see something in the shape of a heart and she would take a picture of it. And she's really, as I really did more research on her, she's really impressive. But her movies too, you're right. She was in 50 First Dates. She was in The Wedding Singer. which is another great Adam Sandler movie with her in it as well. She was Never Been Kissed. So Never Been Kissed is another good one that she was in. And the list goes on. I mean, she's been in a lot. But then she has her own talk show now, and she has her own production company, and she's just kind of all over the place in terms of, the person that she is today and the empire that she's built.
Starting in one position, starting one way and ending up another. She started as that quintessential child star, and she made us all remember what it was. That's why parents said, no, you don't want to be a child star. You don't want to end up like this person or this person. And back in the day, in the 80s, I mean, we had the Ty Bridges and I'm trying to think of all the different, Chris, you could speak to this better, all the different child stars that just ruined themselves and everything, but Drew Barrymore makes me think more of Blossom and Mayim Bialik, where they came out and above, they went past their characters, and now they are smart, intelligent, they came out of that child stardom.
Yeah, you bring up, I mean, there's a lot of, God, there's so many. I mean, Corey Feldman, who's still,
Corey Feldman,
Dana Plato, Different Strokes as well.
Who I was thinking of, yeah.
Yeah. There's a huge list that did not make it out, and she did.
It's just, I can't imagine the weight, and it's probably worse today. I mean, the weight on these kids back then was one thing. Today, add to the teen beat, add to the tabloids, add to the television, you've got a 24-hour news cycle, a 24-hour entertainment news cycle, the internet. It's just got to be absolutely crushing upon kids today. And the ease of becoming a star arguably is easier. There's more paths of entry that don't require the big studios. I mean, Justin Bieber got started because YouTube. I mean, there is a path for these kids to seek fame and to get it. And I just think that it's, you got to be careful because there's just such a huge weight on these kids, and there always has been, but arguably maybe more today.
Do you remember when she was on the Letterman show?
Yeah.
Yes.
And she had turned around and she was topless. There's certain Letterman shows that were just burned into my brain, and that was one of them. Like, I can't believe someone just did that. And at the time, she was young. I don't know if she was too young.
Was it his birthday? She flashed her breast for his birthday?
Yeah, she was early 20s, I think.
Early 20s, okay.
I think so, yeah. But I mean, you're right. And, it's definitely the struggles that she had and the fact that she could get to where she is today. And, by the way, do all of these happy movies, these movies that have a heart, right? These movies that when we think about some of the movies that I mentioned, they're happy movies. They have a heart. They feel good. And that, you mentioned, of course, Firestarter, which, I guess was a feel-good movie to you, Shell, but to the rest of us, it was kind of terrifying. I want to mention something, though, John, that you touched on a little bit here, and the social media today. And so how difficult it must be for them. But I would also, if I could play devil's advocate for a second, the news cycle today, because there's so much coming at us, it's really short. So you make a mistake. Now, I mean, cancel culture aside, which is an issue that is a much bigger thing that could be discussed for hours. You're in that news cycle, and then boom, you're gone, and here comes somebody else doing something. Whereas in the 80s, there was only a certain amount of content we could consume. So when you did something, it was out there for months and sometimes over a year before there was something else that came along that, particularly as a celebrity, that would entice people to say, okay, now I want to hear about what this person did to screw up as well. So I think it's probably more difficult in the sense that one misstep today and we got second chances in the 80s.
And publicists now, though, too, that will just smooth over just about anything. I don't know how many people were trying to smooth over the news in the 80s as they are now. If their client does something wrong, they didn't go to rehab. They were exhausted.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the term they used back then is you had to wait for someone to knock you off the front page.
That's right.
That's what it was. And today there isn't a front page. There are pages and multiple versions of pages. And so there's room for everybody there. And yet, because there's room for everybody, unless you've really found a way to screw up, it's gonna pass.
Okay. So now we've talked about three, as we usually do, completely different characters, people, pop culture. We had the Fonz, played by Henry Winkler. We had Apollo Creed, played by Carl Weathers. And we had Drew Barrymore, one of the very few that has taken her name and created an entire brand out of it and touched so many different aspects of pop culture. So now the question becomes for the two of you, I should say. So the three things: the Fonz, Henry Winkler, Apollo Creed, Carl Weathers, Drew Barrymore. What are those three things? How do those three things connect? Think about what I was talking about with each one of them and the different areas that we saw them.
I had two thoughts on it, but I have trouble connecting the third. My first one was about redemption, that every single one of these characters went from one stereotypical place and ended up in a completely different place in their life, both personally and in the characters that they played. So my first idea was redemption, but I can't quite do that as much. But then my second thought was, I'm trying to remember if there was anything about the movie Scream, because we did have Henry Winkler in Scream and we did have Drew Barrymore in Scream as iconic portions of that, but then I can't tie together Carl Weathers in that either.
I can, sort of.
Okay.
And only because you just said it. So we've got Drew Barrymore, and it literally, if this is it, I just made the connection 2 seconds ago. We had Henry Winkler as the principal, and we had Drew Barrymore as the girl that meets her untimely demise right at the very beginning. Like, I remember thinking, oh, Drew Barrymore's going to be in this movie. And yeah, well, not for long. But Carl Weathers, the reporter that was played by Courtney Cox, was something Gale Weathers.
Gale Weathers, yeah.
Stormy Weathers. And I'm like, it's a stretch, but I'm like, I can bring Weathers into Scream doing that. That's about as far as I got. Otherwise, I got nothing.
Okay. So that's actually really good. And I hadn't thought of that, but it does make sense. And I probably would have, in your shoes, would have gone that direction as well. It does make absolute sense for 2 out of the 3. However, you are now going to learn something about me. This all ties into one of my favorite performers, somebody who has his content and his roles have gotten me through a lot of times where I just needed to laugh. And I needed to laugh and I needed to feel good. I needed to feel like somebody out there was still producing things with a heart. And so we're coming into the holiday season, and he has 2 songs that are classic holiday songs. And the tie is Adam Sandler movies. They are all in Adam Sandler movies. So Henry Winkler was and I mentioned it throughout. I was giving you little indicators. He was in Waterboy. He was now they were main characters, by the way, not side characters. He was a main character in the Waterboy. He played the college football coach who took on the Waterboy as his player on the team. You had Carl Weathers played Chubbs, who was Chubbs Peterson, who is a classic Adam Sandler movie character that constantly gets referenced in pop culture and was a main part of the movie. And then, of course, Drew Barrymore in 50 First Dates, as you mentioned, Shell, The Wedding Singer, and also Blended, which was not one of the classics for Adam Sandler, but the other 2 most certainly are.
I don't know how we missed it. We danced all around it the entire time.
We absolutely did. And like he said, we mentioned the things that were with him. And really, it was all about turkey for you, turkey for me.
Yeah.
Turkey on TV.
Yeah. Let's keep turkey in a big brown shoe. Yeah, that's, yeah. And the Hanukkah song.
I've never heard that.
You've never heard the Adam Sandler turkey song?
Okay,
Never.
Okay, John, you're just as expendable
Wow.
as the rest of us. That's just
No,
Yes.
I didn't.
unacceptable.
I know the Hanukkah song.
Well, the turkey song is just as good. The Thanksgiving song it is. The Thanksgiving
it's
song.
not the same.
The Thanksgiving song is great. Yeah.
Can't be as big.
I wish turkey only cost a nickel. Yeah, that's it. Gobble, gobble, gibble. Yeah, so...
And didn't he do bedtime stories? And there was something with was it him with the remote control? Something.
Yeah,
with
Click.
Click. Yes, with that. Yeah.
With Henry Winkler as well. So Henry
Okay.
Winkler was in Click as well.
Wow. Yeah,
Um,
see, lots of connections there.
Well, I think what he did is there's certain actors that create a genre all by themselves.
mhm.
And you can describe movies as being Adam Sandler like movies. It created an entire genre around it of movies that were character driven and yet scenario driven as well. You look at Billy Madison, you look at any and all of the movies, they have a central premise that's fairly simple. Have to start school over again and go all the way through. But the movies have a very distinct beginning, middle, end. It's very formulaic. He has the problem. They have to battle through the problem. They have the resolution. It's like a 3-course meal. I've talked about it before. They're movies that give the viewer exactly what they want to see. And there's something to be said that's a good thing. You said help to get me through times when you want to turn that part of your brain off that's dealing with issues there's very few movies that do that better for you than his movies.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because you think about how silly some of the movies are, and again, I talked about how they all have a heart. But then you think about people who have actually been in his movies multiple times, and he really has. I mean, there's some phenomenal actors and actresses. I mean, Drew Barrymore being one, and Henry Winkler actually was in You Don't Mess with the Zohan as well, which is one I think is awesome to kind of what Adam Sandler one that flew under the radar, but hilarious. But then you even think about like Steve Buscemi. I mean, we think of Steve Buscemi as just this classic actor, and he's I think in 5 different Adam Sandler movies, and he plays these ridiculous characters. But it just goes to show that I think people want to be around him. I do think that he has this magnet. He just pulls people in, and they want to be around him. I think for the same reason that all of us and most people enjoy his movies. Again, when you need a laugh, when you just need to escape, when you just things are piling up, and you're like, you know what? I need to feel good. And I don't know Adam Sandler obviously, but I feel like these people all gravitate to him because he's that kind of guy that makes people feel good. And that's why they keep coming back and doing movies with him. And that's why he can pull people like Steve Buscemi and Henry Winkler and Carl Weathers and Drew Barrymore. And you can go down the list. Now Jennifer Aniston doing a lot of movies with him. And these are accomplished people who are starring in these, quote unquote, silly movies. Why? Because Adam Sandler, I think.
I could see that. He just did the Jennifer Aniston. It was like a 2-part series on Netflix with something about vacation. I can't recall
Murder
the name
mysteries.
of it.
Murder mystery.
Yeah.
I'll play devil's advocate for just a quick second. And I've been sitting here thinking, do I say it? Do I not say it? Because I don't want the hate to come flying at me. I've never been a fan of what I always call like the Dumb and Dumber movies, the really silly, when he does the voice, the high-pitched voice part. I've not been a fan of Billy Madison as a whole movie. I've not been a fan of any of those. It's just not the kind of movies I like watching, so they didn't draw me to them. I didn't like his characters on Saturday Night Live. I kind of found them annoying. But all of that said, even though I wouldn't watch the movies from beginning to end. They just don't draw I like a drier, more sarcastic, like the things that make me laugh are just different. The moments that he created in our pop culture are for all of us. Getting beaten up by Bob Barker on the golf course is an iconic moment in pop culture. It doesn't get much better than that. So even if you don't like the movies, what he's given to us in terms of pop culture gold is like Oscar worthy. These are just ridiculously amazing moments. And that one in particular is my all-time favorite.
That scene there was, and I hesitated to say, though, unpopular opinion, that I do love a lot of the stuff that Adam Sandler does, but Happy Gilmore, I know that's an unpopular opinion. I didn't actually care for the movie other than like the Bob Barker scene, because it goes back to me. I guess I didn't like Caddyshack either. It was a slapstick sort of sense of humor that I didn't find very funny. I think it was more of a boy, again, going back to that boy girl thing. It was a little bit more of a boy movie, and parts were funny, but not the whole thing for me.
Yeah, getting Bob Barker to say bitch is just, I mean, that might be like the highlight of Hollywood. But I do want to bring up one more thing about him, because I think this wraps it up nicely with Adam Sandler. If you haven't seen the song that he performed with his guitar and wrote for as a dedication to Chris Farley. You should find it, Google it. It's amazing. And it shows the true heart that the guy has and the love that he has for the people that were in his life. And of course, the shooting star that was Chris Farley and the impact that he had on everyone else.
So if we take anything away from today's episode, and again, in that vein of let's bring the things we miss and love about the past into the present, it's maybe take a look at the movies that he's made with, and I can do this for myself, a different point of view. I do have kids. I could see myself calling a family movie night and bringing my 11-year-old up and my 19-year-old up and being able to enjoy a movie together, because I think his movies do that. And just let it be simple and let it be family, because there's not a lot of those movies being made today, I don't think. I can't think of many that have an Adam Sandler push. Adam Sandler's not making those movies today, so that tells you something.
Yep, absolutely. Shell?
Final thought here would be, Chris, you did an amazing job putting these together. And like John said, you peppered this with clues literally throughout. And I feel like I was Drew Barrymore in 50 First Dates, and like everything just got forgot. And then you come up with Adam Sandler, and that's how I feel at this very moment is I should have seen it. I should have known it. I should have remembered that. I should have saw that moment 10 minutes ago.
I don't think we've gotten any of these yet.
No, we haven't.
I think we've all hit around the edges of all of these. And we mentioned things that at the end become a part of the connection together. But I think it actually helps to weave that web. And we see that there are so many connections among us, among our generation, among our shared memories, that, to end this segment here, it's just proof that even though we don't come up with them, we have a really good clue. And once it is revealed, we all know and we say, yes, aha. We have those aha moments.
All right, y'all. This is John Catrides, also known as Gen X Jono, signing off. We'll see you guys again soon.
And this is Rochelle Oblak, also known as Gen X Shell. We'll see you soon.
Chris Clews, known as Chris Clews. Stay rad, everybody. Stay rad.